أشرف المرسلين سيدنا ونبينا ومولانا محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وعلى آله وصحبه أجمعين. رب اشرح لي صدري ويسر لي أمري واحلل عقدة من لساني يفقه قولي. سبحانك لا علم لنا إلا ما علمتنا إنك أنت العليم الحكيم. اللهم علمنا ما ينفعنا وانفعنا بما علمتنا وزدنا علما. آمين برحمتك يا أرحم الراحمين. السلام عليكم ورحمة الله تعالى وبركاته. أهلا وسهلا ومرحبا بكم. I welcome you back to our live answers, live video answers with myself. We'll be dealing with a number of questions that we've received on our various platforms, and we'll take them one by one bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And of course, we'll give due consideration to the questions that we have received before looking at any subsidiary questions that we receive as we proceed bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. So ahlan wa sahlan bikum. Do take the moment to like, subscribe and share this information with others who may benefit as well bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. And inshallah, let us commence with our first question, which is, how do I break the habit of repeatedly falling into the same sin? How do I break the habit of repeatedly falling into the same sin? Bismillahir Rahmanir Rahim. First and foremost, may Allah commend you and may Allah Azza wa Jal reward you for your willingness to break away from the vice of sin, the traps of shaitan in the form of sin, and may Allah make it easy for you. As for how exactly somebody can break away from repeatedly falling into the same sin, in other words, break away from addiction, well, the key to this lies within the conditions of tawbah itself. For we know from the conditions of tawbah, as Imam Nawawi highlights in Riyadus Salihin among other works, that there are 4 conditions of tawbah. 3, if it is only between oneself and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and 4, if it is between oneself and another human being. So for example, if my sinning is only between myself and Allah, it would be breaking the commands of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, but not infringing on the rights of any of Allah's creation in the process. For example, a man who has some bad habit of watching illicit material online or through any form of media, that sin is between himself and between Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So if he wants to stop that particular sin, then number 1, he has to obviously stop the sin. Number 2, he has to feel bad about committing the sin. He has to genuinely have some remorse for committing that sin. So if he relishes in the idea of the sin, if he relishes in the memory of the sin, and he somewhat looks fondly upon that particular sin, this would of course not be in line with tawbah. Then number 3, he should promise Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that he will not return to the sin. And what this really means is that the person genuinely appeals to Allah Azza wa Jal and says to Allah, "Oh Allah, I sincerely want to never go back to the sin again. I have no intention of going back to the sin again." The person of course can't at the same time think, well, maybe I'll go back to it tomorrow, because that would not be promising Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala at all. And then if it is between someone and another creation of Allah, in other words, the 4 conditions that would now come into place, the 4th one is to then return the rights of others. Now, when I said that the secret to breaking away from a cycle of sin lies within the 4 conditions of tawbah, what I specifically mean is that within a promise to not return back to the sin, there are certain measures that one would have to take in order to be true to that promise. So for example, if somebody sincerely wants to break away from sinning, and they simply trust themselves and their willpower to abstain from that sin, even though that particular measure has not worked before, then unfortunately their means of breaking away from that sin is going to be very, very weak. But somebody who sincerely promises not to engage in that sin anymore would actually burn the bridges between himself and that particular sin. So, for example, if one sin is in relation to an extramarital affair, then one would have to break ties, all forms of ties and communication with the other person, with whom one is having that particular affair. Whether that means blocking their number, whether that means getting rid of one's own number, changing one's number, and forgetting all information about that person, deleting the email address, deleting all forms of connection with that person, and even to the extent of removing oneself from the social media platforms where perhaps this communication initiated. If it is in relation to, for example, watching explicit or illicit material online, then to either deactivate one's internet subscription, although that may seem like a drastic measure, but you could have a limited internet subscription as opposed to an uncapped internet subscription, wherein you would only utilize the internet for necessities and for matters of work. If this is a measure that would assist in breaking away from that sin, then it is a measure that we should take. Furthermore, if your sin is something that can materially be moved away from, for example, if a person is engaged in substance abuse, then if there is a measure that can be taken to assist that person to move away from that substance abuse, for example, there are certain forms of medication, depending on which substance the person is addicted to, that he or she may seek medical advice from a qualified physician in order to help them get rid of that particular sin. And there are many other programs like 12-step programs and the like. Of course, this is not going to be a one-size-fits-all type of endeavor, because sins are of all different forms and shapes and sizes. So it really depends on what sin this particular individual is falling back into repeatedly. So if this doesn't work, where personal intervention and distancing between oneself and that sin, is not applicable, and one needs assistance with that sin, then I would highly advise that you speak to someone that you trust. Now remember, there's no confession in Islam, and we should also not divulge our secrets that Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala had concealed for us. However, if it means that divulging your secret to a trusted person would possibly assist you in getting rid of that sin from your life, then I would advise to actually speak to a professional, whether this be a Muslim psychologist or a scholar or a person of spirituality, a shaykh, who can perhaps guide you to the specifics as to how to get rid of that sin. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala make it easy for all of us to stay clean of sins. And then lastly, I would like to add to this and say that إِنَّ الْحَسَنَاتِ يُذْهِبْنَ السَّيِّئَاتِ. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala says that good deeds, they keep away the bad deeds. They cause the bad deeds to flee. So if we're really serious about ridding ourselves of sin, the nafs is such that it will feel that void and it will draw your attention to that void dramatically so. So the moment you desist from one particular sin, you're going to have a void. If your sin is, mathalan, watching and binge watching endless amounts of movies and series that is inappropriate for a believer to do or to watch, then there's going to be this massive void that your nafs is going to highlight and shaitan is going to highlight. So I would advise in such an instance to prepare yourself for the detox from the sin by creating positive and beneficial alternatives. Now, it's easy to say, well, simply just start reciting more Quran or making salah and making dhikr. But for somebody who's been seriously engaged in sin, to immediately remove themselves from that sin and at the same time actively engage within ibadah, it may be a tall order for some. So in that instance, I would say find permissible alternatives. That's not necessarily ibadah per se, but there are valid alternatives that would lessen the gaping hole that the sin leaves behind. Like the person who's binge watching unlawful material, they could perhaps begin by substituting it with lawful material, like nature documentaries or something absolutely innocent. So they slowly withdraw from that, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. So we move on to the second question for this particular session, bi'idhnillahi ta'ala. How do I remain having a heart attached to the masjid? How do I remain having a heart attached to the masjid? Now, this is a noble desire, because the Prophet ﷺ, he informed us that there will be 7 categories of people. سَبَعَةٌ يُظِلُّهُمُ اللَّهُ فِي ظِلِّهِ يَوْمَ لَا ظِلَّ إِلَّا ظِلُّهُ. There will be 7 categories of people who will be shaded under the arsh of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala on that day when there will be no shade except for that shade. And one of the categories that he mentioned particularly is رَجُلٌ قَلْبُهُ مُعَلَّقٌ بِالْمَسَاجِدِ أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. It is a man whose heart is suspended at the masjid. He's like a fish out of water when he's not in the masjid. He constantly desires to be in the house of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So the question is, how do I remain having a heart attached to the masjid? And the answer that I believe to be the most suitable in relation to this is twofold. Number one, it is to persistently attend the masjid. So you develop a habit, you develop a love for the masjid if you don't already have this. And then number two, allow yourself some time to pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and ask Him to make you love the places of worship. Remember, the masajid are the best places in the world, and the marketplaces are the worst places in the world. And at the same time, when you pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, you need to be sincere in your desire to be attached to the masjid. So that's the twofold approach. Regularly attend the masjid, because you can't claim to love, attending the masjid and you never attend the masjid. So attend the masjid regularly, even if it is initially a difficult task to do because you don't find yourself particularly inclined towards going to the masjid. Set yourself a target. So for example, I'll be attending the masjid twice a day, thrice a day for the next 3 weeks, mathalan, and you do that consistently, even though that habit building process may be difficult and somewhat uncomfortable for the nafs to digest. And then while you are doing this, pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to allow you to fall in love with the house of Allah. And a third, perhaps a bonus point I'd say, is that if you are finding that the masjid you generally attend is not really appealing to you, perhaps because of whatever, extraneous circumstances that's not within your control, and we know that often this is the case, while these things shouldn't really affect us because we are there for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, the reality is that sometimes you pray in a mosque and because of the internal politics, you may feel uncomfortable. If that is the case, and this becomes a deterrent for you from visiting the masjid, visiting the house of Allah, I would then advise that you find an alternative place of worship, an alternative masjid, wherein you are more comfortable and more at home until you find that you can build a relationship with the house of Allah as a whole. Then perhaps when you return to your usual masjid or your local masjid, you will find it to be much more conducive because you'll be more focused and you'll be able to really concentrate on the reason that you've attended that particular masjid in the first place. Lastly, I think I would also point to the fact that you need to stay focused. This is part of the third point, really. Find a place of worship that is conducive for your ibadah, where you are not focused on other things. At the same time, this is a personal responsibility that you have to take upon yourself. So in other words, I'm attending the masjid. I am worshipping Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. I'm coming here for a particular purpose. Make sure that intention remains front and center throughout your visit, from the moment you leave your home until the time you return, because it's easy to become distracted by all of these extraneous things. But for the person who comes, prays, for example, in the front saf, he's not there for any other purpose. He's not there to look at other people or to engage in conversations with others. That's completely permissible. He's not there for these extraneous things. He's there for one particular niyyah, and he remains true to that niyyah. That would probably be one of the best approaches to remain focused. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. طيب, we then continue to the next question, inshallah ta'ala. What should one's niyyah in acting upon one's knowledge be? What should one's niyyah or intention in acting upon one's knowledge be? So somebody seeks sacred knowledge. So they attend a dars or they sign up for a course on seekersguidance.org and they start learning. And now they want to implement that knowledge. The niyyah always should be lillahi ta'ala. Whether it be prayer, whether it be reading Quran, whether it be giving charity, the ultimate niyyah should be for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and any other specifics that the sacred law prescribes. For a salah, for example, which salah is it, that it is a fard salah, that you are facing the direction of the qibla, that it is being done on time, etc. That's all part of your intention. But the ultimate intention should be that you are seeking the pleasure of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. Look, for example, at the intention of learning as stated by Imam al-Haddad before he conducted his lessons. نوينا التعلم والتعليم والتذكر والتذكير والإفادة والنفع بكتاب الله وسنة نبيه صلى الله عليه وسلم أو كما قال. We intend to learn and to also teach and to benefit others and to hold on to the book of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala and His Messenger sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. To be, sort of comprehensive, this niyyah really, this statement really comprises of everything that we should be intending. But for the person who doesn't necessarily want to say this or, mention a particular formula, it is sufficient that in one's heart, one is mindful of the fact that I'm doing this purely for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, by following what I've learned for His sake. And the intention of specifically practicing on the knowledge that one has attained is going to be incorporated into that. Because there is no practicing on knowledge without the knowledge in the first place. Al-amal bila ilm la yakun. Right? Action without knowledge cannot be. Wal-ilmu bila amal majnoon. And to have knowledge and not to practice upon it is madness. So you have to have knowledge as a prerequisite for you to practice correctly. So when you do practice based on that knowledge, just let it be for the sake of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, and that will be sufficient, inshaAllah. Barakallahu fikum. We move on to the next question, inshaAllah. We live in societies of individualism, so what is the benefit consulting scholars when studying? We live in societies of individualism, so what is the benefit of consulting scholars when studying? Khair, when undertaking any endeavor in one's life, the sunnah as set by Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wasallam is to make mashwara, to consult. Whenever the Prophet alayhi salatu wasalam and the Sahaba engaged in any matter of importance, the way they would deal with it is to first and foremost make mashwara and to take the opinions of those who are relevant, loved ones, have your best interests at heart, etc. And once they give you their opinions, then to turn to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with istikhara. In other words, pray Allah guide you to that which is best for you, and then to take a decision. So the benefit in terms of consulting with scholars for your path of knowledge is that scholars, Islamic scholars, are the experts when it comes to the field of ilm, right? There is no clergy in Islam. So we don't have a priesthood. But if you're going to enter into a university, the university will have a particular guideline as to how to go about choosing your studies and which path of study you would choose. And they're not going to allow you to mix up, for example, something from the humanities faculty with something from an unrelated faculty in a big way. Yes, they allow you some leeway in choosing, extra courses. But as for your mainstream of study, they would have a particular curriculum that they stick to and that they would guide students with. So even though you have some freedom, that freedom is within certain parameters that guides you to that which is most beneficial for you. So especially since we have such individualism within society today, And it's no longer as it used to be, where the teacher sets the curriculum and the student just follows suit. But now, based on online studies and the like, it's easy for the student to just go about, start studying, and pick a little bit here, a little bit there, put them all together, and start their journey of knowledge. And while there may be khair in that, it would be ill-advised to do this without consulting the experts or the scholars for their guidance in this regard. They would know that knowledge is to be sought, in a Rabbani fashion. And Rabbani is taking the basic principles of knowledge before taking the more complex. So there are gradual stages, incremental stages of pursuing sacred knowledge, as there would be in any science. So instead of pursuing that which is far more complex for a beginner to understand, the teacher, the scholar, would be able to guide the student to say, look, don't study this particular text. It wouldn't be optimal for you at this stage in your studies. Instead, study a different text. And similarly, the student may find that the text that the scholar advised isn't necessarily the text that the student would have chosen. The student has a different preference, but the scholar knows that the student needs to get this basis before he or she pursues that which they believe to be in their best interests. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. So this is why it is advisable and beneficial to consult with scholars when studying, just so that you know that your study trajectory is going to be in the best way and the most beneficial way for learning, which is essentially your intention, and Allah knows best. طيب. The next question is about contentment. What is contentment, and what are the states or the statements of discontentment? Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala tells us about contentment in the Quran, and He also teaches us about what brings about contentment. In a verse that we've probably heard many times before, Ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub. Verily it is with the remembrance of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that hearts find contentment. So contentment in the remembrance of Allah is something that is felt. And the way I like to describe the feeling of the heart when it feels this contentment and how one perceives it. I mean, anyone who feels this contentment, they know what they are feeling, right? No one can go to them and tell them, no, you're not actually feeling contentment. However, contentment is attained when the purpose for which something has been created is the very act that this thing is occupied with. Let's take a worldly example. If I were to take a butter knife and use it as a screwdriver, I'm probably going to get detrimental results, because neither the butter knife nor the screw head was built for that purpose. Maybe I get it right to unscrew with the butter knife, or maybe I hurt myself and the screw and the butter knife in the process. However, when I take a screwdriver and I proceed to unscrew the same screw and the screwdriver fits, immediately what I'd find is I'm more comfortable, the screw isn't going to be damaged, and neither is the screwdriver going to be damaged, because everything has been built for that particular purpose. Another worldly example. If you were to take a state-of-the-art computer and present it to a group of people who have never been exposed to modern technology at all, so they don't know the first thing about computers, you may find that they end up using that, say it's a laptop, they end up using that laptop as a cutting board. So they'll cut their fruits and their vegetables, and they may find that it works, or they may find that it's not the best option for them. However, it's just not going to be the ideal situation. But when the laptop is used for that which it has been designed for, then the one using it will find the most value possible out of that particular machine. So now we put the worldly examples aside and we look at insan, we look at our own hearts and our own states. We have been designed and we've been created to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. وَمَا خَلَقْتُ الْجِنَّ وَالْإِنسَ إِلَّا لِيَعْبُدُونَ. I have not created jinn kind nor humankind except to worship me, says Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So from this, we understand that the purpose of our creation, the purpose of the essence of our creation, which is our qalb, is to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So when we serve Allah, or when we find ourselves engaged in the service of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, we are living according to the purpose for which we were created. And in that we find peace and contentment. And the less we engage in that which we were created for, the more we will find discontentment. In other words, when I'm sitting in a state of fulfillment, that means I have fulfilled that which Allah had made obligatory upon me. I stayed away from that which Allah had prohibited for me, and I'm engaged in abundance of that which I'm created for. In a state such as that, it is inevitable that that person will feel a sense of contentment. But for the person who withdraws from the remembrance of Allah, they do that which they are prohibited from doing, or they don't engage in what Allah had commanded them to engage in, then they find themselves in a state of not fulfilling the very purpose for which they were created. They may not perceive it as such. Like the person who doesn't believe in Allah doesn't necessarily perceive that he or she is not remembering Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they're not fulfilling their purpose. They may think that their purpose is some worldly pursuit, and they may well attain that worldly pursuit. However, the feeling on the inside is that something is wrong, something is in disarray. And the only way to fix that feeling of not belonging, that state of discontentment, is to go back to one's purpose for which one was created, and that is nothing else but to serve Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. This doesn't mean, as some people falsely think, that you have to sit in the masjid and read Quran and make dhikrullah from the morning till the evening and do nothing else. No, this basically just means that you do the essentials that Allah had commanded you to do, in other words, your fara'id, and you stay away from the haram. That's your base level of seeking contentment. And then beyond that, the more you engage in khair, the more you engage in goodness, ibadah and the like, the more you will feel this contentment. And this is why, ala bi dhikrillahi tatma'innul qulub. Verily, it is with the remembrance of Allah that the hearts will find contentment, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. طيب, we move on to the next question, and the next question reads, how do I develop a habit of praying on time? How do I develop a habit of praying on time? This is an excellent question. The question shows a sincere desire to be a solid slave of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So I would begin by stating that your sincere desire is the first step. A person who has no such desire is not going to attain it. But after the desire, now you need to take action. And the action that you take has to be practical measures that are genuinely going to bring you closer to praying on time regularly. So the best advice in this regard that I personally found to be efficacious is to specifically pray not just on time, but at the beginning of the waqt. So in other words, to aim to pray on time gives you a large leeway, right? It gives you a space of a couple of hours. From the beginning of the waqt till the end of the waqt, you have some time. However, if you restrict yourself to pray at the beginning of the waqt, right, except with cases in which you need, or cases in which you cannot pray at the beginning of the waqt, then you set your alarm, right? These days, your smartphones and your smartwatches, etc., you can set several alarms. You can set 5 alarms, one for each waqt. And of course, you have many of these applications where the adhan would actually sound, although I don't advise that, because sometimes the adhan sounds in places that you wouldn't necessarily want the name of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala to be mentioned, like the toilet, etc. But a simple alarm would suffice. And then, as soon as that alarm sounds, that is an indication that whatever you are doing, you need to stop with that, immediately proceed to perform wudu and pray as fast as you can, not in terms of the speed of the prayer, but in terms of getting to the prayer. This is the most effective way to develop a habit of praying on time. Yes, the objective is on time so that you are not sinful. However, to attain that objective, you have to set your bar higher, right? So in other words, if you aim for the stars, maybe you land on the clouds. But if you aim for the clouds, you're going to land on the treetops, that type of example. So set your bar high by saying, look, I will not just pray on time. I'm going to strive to pray at the beginning of every waqt. And if you do that, inshallah ta'ala, and you pray to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, then with these steps that you take, you can definitely develop a habit of praying on time, inshallah. There are other methods as well. I know Shaykh Faraz in one of the previous questions and answers segments dealt with specifically Fajr. So there are buddy systems that you could work out. You and a friend, you ask each other to just send a reminder for each waqt. Have you prayed yet? As simple as that. And this too can help. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant you contentment and make us from among those who always pray, not just on time, but at the beginning of the waqt. Ameen, Ya Rabbil Alameen. We proceed to the next question, inshallah ta'ala. Are there any dispensations for years of zakah owed? Are there any dispensations for years of zakah owed? So, no, there are no dispensations in the sense that you no longer need to give that zakah. I'm not sure if that's the correct word that was intended by this questioner. The other possibility is that they're asking about penalties. Are there any penalties? No, there are no penalties either. But what one should do is sincerely make tawbah to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala for not fulfilling one's zakah. It is a serious offense, just as missing a prayer would be. And just as you would have to make up for the prayer, you would have to make up for the zakah that you did not pay by paying it as soon as possible. Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala a'lam. And then we move on to the next question. Can I miss Friday prayers due to caring for sick relatives? So this is an important concept in Islam, right? That when there is difficulty, al-mashaqqatu tajlibu at-taysir, the difficulty will be a reason for ease to be brought around. And the ease in this sense is the dispensations. So often religious obligations such as attending the Friday prayer will be overlooked if somebody has another obligation that they are seeing to, such as seeing to a sick relative. And of course, this is going to be a matter of relativity. How ill is the relative? Do they need somebody to be there with them at every given moment? Are there others upon whom Jumu'ah is not obligatory who can perhaps take care of their needs? All of these need to be considered. But if the situation is such that one cannot manage in any other way, then of course the Sharia would allow you to miss your Jumu'ah because of seeing to a sick relative, just as if you yourself were ill, and Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala knows best. And then finally, it's the last of the questions that I have. Can I start a study circle? Can I start a study circle in my community if there are no scholars where I live? This is a beautiful question. Again, many of the questions, they are very positive in the sense that they show the sincere intentions of the brothers and sisters of this ummah. May Allah reward you in abundance. So, if there are no scholars and students of deen in the communities in which you live, then know, because we are living in the information age, there are online resources for us to benefit from. And it does not mean that because we don't have physical access to scholars that we have no access to scholars. In fact, Seeker's Guidance is one such amazing initiative that allows access to reliable scholars from various madhahib across the continents. And for people who have no access physically to scholars and scholarship, they have an online presence of scholars. As for can you start a community circle or a study circle, a halaqa in your community? Absolutely. but I would still advise that you do so with the guidance of scholars. And as you said, there are no scholars in the community, so you would resort to finding guidance with scholars online. One of the beautiful initiatives that have recently been put in place on seekersguidance.org is the opportunity to have one-on-one sessions with the teachers of Seekers Guidance, for which a student can then come onto the platform and actually request a session, explain what it is that they would like to speak to the scholar about, and then the scholar would arrange a time, a 10-minute segment, in which the student can actually engage with the scholar and ask the necessary questions. So this is one way of accessing scholars, even though you don't have physical access. Then in addition to that, if it's going to be a study circle where no scholars or students are present, then I would recommend that you stick to reading a text and simply being guided by the text that you read. A text of this nature should ideally include some questions with their answers, some Quran ayat, some ahadith, etc. But those engaged in the circle should essentially just be reading the material and asking questions based on what they find in the material, and not try to take the place of scholars by way of venturing into matters that the text doesn't deal with directly, because this could lead to a plethora of problems that communities have seen again and again, where we start taking the initiative, thinking that it's as easy as just guessing the answer or assuming what the answer is. At the end of the day, as logical as it may seem, but we have to always act and apply authentic, reliable knowledge. And in Islam, this doesn't just mean something we found in a book. This means something that we found in a book, but received directly from a teacher, who received it directly from a teacher, who received it directly from a teacher. And that chain goes all the way up to Rasulullah sallallahu alayhi wa ala alihi wa sahbihi wa sallam. And this is what we refer to as Ahlu Sunnah wal Jama'ah, the people of the Sunnah, and the Jama'ah of scholars, meaning the majority of scholars who took from the majority of scholars, that go all the way up to the Sahaba, Ridwanullahi ta'ala alayhim ajma'een. And another way of expressing this, in terms of how we refer to it, we say this is traditional Islam. We live in a world where the word traditional has a very bad reputation. But for Muslims, traditional is the word that we really seek when we find out whether something is valid, whether something is reliable and trustworthy or not. And for Muslims, traditional basically means that you are trying to align yourself with scholars who are aligned with the Sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, as it has been passed down through teachers. Remember that if Allah willed, the Prophet, peace be upon him, could have woken up and the entire Quran could have been revealed to him overnight, memorized in his heart, and he could have then taught that to the Sahaba. Even the explanation and the understanding of the Quran could have been revealed in the same way. However, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala did not send the Quran in this way. He chose to send the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam with a teacher. He chose to send him the Quran along with a teacher. And this teacher was there to demonstrate, to explain, and even to revise with Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam, which is what they did during the nights of Ramadan, when Jibreel alayhi salatu wasallam used to meet with him every night in the month of Ramadan. فَيُدَارِسُهُ الْقُرْآنِ. They would revise whatever was revealed of the Quran. And this is the methodology or the pedagogy of learning of traditional Islam. Even though we have access to information, even though we may have AI and ChatGPT and PDFs enough to last you from now until the day of Qiyamah, your knowledge of Islam, because it's sacred knowledge, should always be twofold. The reading of the material, authentic and traditional, along with traditional learning with traditional scholars. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the tawfiq and make us from among those who learn beneficial knowledge, practice what we learn, and teach it to others. خَيْرُكُمْ مَنْ تَعَلَّمَ الْقُرْآنَ وَعَلَّمَهُ. The best of you are those who learn the Quran and teach it to others. And as the Prophet ﷺ also said, مَن يُرِدِ اللَّهُ بِهِ خَيْرًا يُفَقِّهُ فِي الدِّينِ. Whosoever Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala wants goodness for, He grants them understanding of the religion. And lastly, the Prophet ﷺ taught us that من سلك طريقا يلتمس فيه علما سهل الله له به طريقا إلى الجنة أو كما قال عليه الصلاة والسلام. Whosoever treads a path seeking knowledge thereby, Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala will make that person's path, because of this, their pursuit of knowledge, Allah will make that person's path to Jannah easy for them. And of course we know that this tremendous gift of making your path to Jannah easy is not just given without any responsibility attached to it. No, there's a serious responsibility attached to it. And that is that we strive to seek knowledge in the way prescribed by our sacred deen. May Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala grant us the tawfiq and make us from among those who, again, learn, practice and teach others. Until next time, inshallah, wa sallallahu ala Sayyidina Muhammad, subhanallahi wa bihamdi, subhanakallahumma wa bihamdik, nashhadu an la ilaha illa anta, nastaghfiruka wa natubu ilayk.